Where do the Minnesota Wild stand with COVID-19 postponements starting to prop up throughout the league? Plus, Bill Guerin named the general manager of Team USA for the Olympics and a Minnesota Wild prospect named to the World Juniors Team USA. We talk about that and more today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked on Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we recap some of the recent news in the NHL, looking at several things going on throughout the league with COVID-19 postponements happening to multiple teams, and where the Minnesota Wild stand after having their game on Tuesday night postponed with the Calgary Flames. Plus, we talk about general manager Bill Guerin being named general manager of Team USA for the Olympics, and a Minnesota Wild prospect named to the World Junior roster for 2022 as well. So kind of a grab bag episode for you, going to bounce around a little bit. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked on Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer, and your host of Locked on Wild. Happy to be back. Unfortunately, not able to get a show in yesterday, a little under the weather. You can maybe hear it in my voice a little bit, but glad to be back at it here today, feeling better, close to on the mend, but still just kind of taking it easy and trying to get back into the swing of things. Obviously, no game on Tuesday night against the Calgary Flames because they have been dealing with some widespread COVID-19 issues. And a lot of teams throughout the schedule finding themselves with postponements at this point in the season. You've got the Calgary Flames, who are dealing with the most widespread of the COVID-19 issues, but teams such as the Carolina Hurricanes, the Nashville Predators, amongst others, starting to have COVID-19 issues of their own. Thankfully, the Minnesota Wild have, as of yet, not been part of this latest wave of COVID-19 postponements after having a ton of it last year. Have not had anything directly caused by them missing players. And as of right now, as of recording this, it does not sound like the Buffalo Sabres are in any sort of COVID-19 situation themselves. And so the Wild should be able to play in tonight's game against Buffalo. So that is a good thing at least. But it is interesting because, depending on where you look, there has been um, plenty of discussion as to what the NHL does if this becomes a wider spread issue. If we see a ton of games postponed for several teams, do you go to the bubble? Do you take just like a couple week pause to give teams a chance to reset? Honestly, I don't know if we're going to see any of that happen. If anything, we may see the end of the season extended slightly because, I saw this on Twitter, and we'll talk about this a little bit today as well. Saw this suggested on Twitter, and so was talking with some of my Locked On colleagues about it. Why not just use the Olympic break, assuming that the NHL does not send players to the Olympics? Why not just use the Olympic break to make up some of these games that have been missed and allow teams a chance to make sure that their roster is fully healthy heading down the stretch? Well, turns out, and it's a very good point, that a lot of those arenas booked events with the assumption that they weren't going to have NHL games to have to try to throw into the schedule. So, um, It's going to be really interesting to see how this is resolved. I mean, obviously they will try to, I'm sure, fit a lot of these into a couple of off days in between games, try to throw it into a back to back, and things along that line. If anything, and it sounds like the NHL is tweaking its COVID-19 protocols or going to ramp them up with the amount of cases that have started to pop up throughout the league. If anything, I think it makes sense for the NHL to go back to the taxi squad, where you have a handful of players for each team that are available to be called up as needed, and it's not going to massively impact your salary cap. You only have up to the salary cap to be able to allocate to players at any given time. So um, I think that would be something that the league is probably looking into or should look into as to how to try to keep teams with enough players to play games. I know the St. Louis Blues have had a couple of games where they've been massively shorthanded that they ended up having to play anyway. So it makes a ton of sense to just use those affiliates for teams and have them with a group of players that are just on standby. Especially when you get out to where you're on the East Coast. I don't think the Wild have as much, or maybe any, um, West Coast travel left in the season, with the exception of like Edmonton and Calgary. They got all the LA teams out of the way, thankfully. So yeah, if you're on the East Coast though, if you are playing, the Islanders and the Rangers, makes all the sense in the world to have a handful of guys that are available in the event that you find out at the team hotel before a game that you have two or three players that aren't going to be available to go. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that reinstituted for the rest of the season, but obviously that's going to have to come from the NHL, and I'm just speculating at this point as to whether or not that is something that they would look into doing. The Minnesota Wild playing the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo's not having a great season, to say the least. They just won against the Jets to snap a 7-game losing streak, and they had lost 4 in a row before that, and then 5 in a row before that win. So really having just an abysmal season, to say the least. So for the Wild, should be able to get Jonas Brodin back for this game, which would be huge. But the Sabres coming in, they're 9-15-4, and they're 2-6-2 in their last 10 games. So at home should be an opportunity for the Wild to come away with a nice bounce back win after a disappointing finish to the road trip. And then after that, we're going to have to wait and see because the Florida Panthers have COVID-19 issues of their own. And so that is tentatively Saturday's opponent. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see if that game ends up indeed happening. And then after that, at Dallas on Monday. To my knowledge, Dallas not dealing with any COVID-19 issues or any major ones. So that game should be fine. And then Detroit Thursday of next week, before a little bit of a break for Christmas. And then at Winnipeg on Monday, the 27th. So that part of the schedule should be safe. But that Panthers game could be one that ends up getting pushed back depending on how Florida's COVID issues end up playing out here over the next day or two. So I would imagine that tonight the Wild will play the Sabres. Of course, if that changes, we'll have another episode for you to try to recap some of that news. Would imagine that that will not be the case, though. And then Saturday up in the air next week should be fine. But of course, we'll keep an eye on it and we'll let you know if anything does happen as we go. We are going to take a short pause. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the big news surrounding the Minnesota Wild. That, of course, being the general manager, Bill Guerin, has been named as the general manager of Team USA for the Olympics. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about if the Olympics are going to happen as well, coming up after the break here on Locked on Wild. No one plays daily fantasy sports to lose. Winning feels so much better. But traditional fantasy sports are a long-term losing proposition because you never know who or what you're up against. Stat Hero is the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform where it's you versus the house in head to head fantasy matchups, winner take all. And here's the crazy part: Stat Hero shows you their lineups before you play, and you handpick the team you want to face one on one. This never before seen innovation of fantasy sports and sports betting hybrid has Stat Hero players clocking odds that are over 4 times better. Why? Because you don't have to compete against thousands of experts or unknowns. Stat Hero puts you in control of your fate. With Stat Hero, you're in control of the stakes. You decide how much you're going to play for, and Stat Hero has no choice but to take it because they're daring you to beat them. Stat Hero head to head is what daily fantasy sports should be, one on one. The matchup of the week this week is the veterans versus the rookies, and going up against Nick Bonino, Mark Stone, Kyle Palmieri, Jeff Petrie, and the Maple Leafs goalies. I'm going to take the rookies, Alex Newhook, Kirill Kaprizov, and others in this one tonight. So that is not a bad route to go, but that is kind of what I'm thinking for tonight's veterans versus rookies matchup. You can sign up for free right now at stathero.com/hockey and use the promo code hockey for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/hockey. Use promo code hockey for a 100% match. stathero.com/hockey, promo code hockey. Terms and conditions apply. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, and again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Just a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. So the other big news that we missed was General Manager Bill Guerin being announced as the General Manager of Team USA for the Olympics. So a huge honor for him, but is it going to happen? Is the big thing. Obviously, with the COVID situation here, stateside becoming more and more of an issue as days go on. That's one angle. The other angle is that as of now, depending on other conditions, if a player were to test positive in China, they could be facing between a 3 and 5 week quarantine, depending on their condition, just to be able to leave. So it's not even that they wouldn't be able to play games here. Like, it would just be for them to head back to the United States or to Canada from the Olympic site. So that's obviously a huge sticking point in the negotiations for the NHL to send players there. Not only with that, but I think with the fact that we're seeing so many teams now starting to run into issues with having players put on the list, I don't think it's going to I don't think it's going to end up happening, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, that's going to be used as a nice break to try to get things back under control and allow teams to try to get everybody rested up and ready to rock for the rest of the season. But I just, where things stand currently with all of these cases, and just with the lack of like firmed out details between the NHL and the Olympics, I don't see it happening. And I know that it's a tremendous honor to represent your country and have a chance to compete for a medal. I mean, Canada, obviously, in this situation with one of the best rosters that exists, going in as favorites, I'm sure it's frustrating for them to be like, well, we were going to probably win the whole thing, and now it doesn't look like it's happening. But at the end of the day, it's trading, 1 month of play at the Olympics for the rest of the NHL season. And I'm not trying to suggest that, if the NHL does elect to go to the Olympics, that they're going to basically be putting the rest of the season in jeopardy. I'm not trying to suggest that at all, but let's say somebody tests positive but just before the gold medal game near the end of competition. You're putting yourself in a situation where on the long end, you may miss quite a few games coming back. And the schedule, at the end of February through March and April is going to be a grind. It's going to be an absolute sprint to the finish. So there's a lot at stake, and I don't envy the situation at all. But it's just telling to me that you've got guys who were pretty solidly in from around the NHL. Maple Leafs captain John Tavares, who has kind of cooled on his desire to be part of the Winter Olympics, saying quotes, and these quotes coming from the Toronto Star Sports. I think we all hope to go, but clearly I think things are a little bit more uneasy than they were. There are definitely some questions that we want to look into and have answered. Um, I I don't know when the deadline is exactly for having to commit to going or not going, but I got to feel like it's coming up soon. We're midway through December, and just there are so many variables that have yet to be figured out that that just haven't happened yet. Connor McDavid, another guy. I'm still a guy that is wanting to go play in the Olympics, but we also want to make sure it's safe for everybody. Austin Matthews, just playing it by ear right now, waiting on a little bit more information to get some more questions answered. Um, it just, and you can go down the list. There have been several players that have, expressed their unease with where things are at. So that leads me kind of back to my point is that I don't think it's going to end up happening. And so this will be, rather than have to halt play, the NHL is just going to use this as a natural break. Teams will have, I'm sure, an opportunity to practice, just try to get everybody that is currently dealing with COVID-19 so that they're past it, so that for the final couple months of the season, that everybody's full systems go, or can be, at least to start it. But tying back into the first part of the show, I think they got to try to do something again with the taxi squad as well. Just in the event that things happen in March and April near the end of the season, that teams are ready to go, and we don't have to have as much of these issues as we currently do. So congratulations to Bill Guerin for being named general manager of Team USA, and good luck, because like I said, I don't see it happening. So if it does, we'll watch, we'll talk about it, of course. But if not, it's not going to surprise me one bit. We will take another quick breather. And when we come back, we'll talk about a couple of members of the Minnesota Wild prospect pool who are going to be competing in the U.S. Nationals, the World Juniors, putting their roster out. So we'll take a look at it. One notable name for the Minnesota Wild. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Wild. Got beard? Get primal. You heard me right. Got beard? Get primal. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get primal. Maybe you're that guy who has never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin oils will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients and with low impact on our planet. Primal Origin Oils makes balms, oils, and whipped butter that are renowned as the best feel in beard products available. All products are free, fair trade, certified, and handcrafted in the USA. The combo kits make a great holiday gift, and if you're shopping for yourself, you'll be glad you did. We know that every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you to compare their ingredients and the feel in beard to the other products you've used. We promise you will see and feel the difference. Remember, the code LOCKEDON gets you 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Again, use the code LOCKEDON at checkout for 20% off of your Primal Origin Oils order. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Looking now at the World Juniors roster for Team USA. And again, apologies if you can hear it in my voice. Still a little bit under the weather, but wanted to get an episode out there, kind of get us caught up as to the news that we missed, at least from a Wild perspective. So here is the roster for Team USA for the World Juniors. Matty Beniers, these are the forwards. Matty Beniers, Brett Berard, Logan Cooley, Matt Coronado, Tanner Dickinson, Dominique James, Matt Nees, Chaz Lucius, Carter Mazur, Sasha Pastiyov, Mackie Samiskevich, Red Savage, Landon Slaggert, and Ty Simulanik. So those are the forwards. Defense, Brock Faber, Luke Hughes, Wyatt Kaiser, Tyler Clevin, Ian Moore, Scott Morrow, Minnesota Wild prospect, and St. Cloud State Husky, Jack Peart, and Jake Sanderson. Goalies are Drew Comezzo, Caden Baracco, and Dylan Silverstein. So, Jack Peart being put on the World Juniors roster, a huge honor for him. So, congratulations, Jack, on that announcement. We'll have to ask him about that once things are finished up a little bit later on in 2022. But still, a tremendous honor and a great news to hear that Peart will be competing at World Juniors. All right, now that we've kind of got all the previous news out of the way, let's circle back and look at tonight's game against the Buffalo Sabres. So, Sabres coming in, as mentioned, they are not having a good year. And I just looking at what the Wild need to do in order to come away with a win. Sabres offensively, not they've got a few players that can beat you, but you look at the goaltending. Their goaltending has been an absolute mess this season. They've used 5 goalies in various capacity. You've got Dustin Tokarski, Aaron Dell, Craig Anderson, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and Malcolm Subban. Collectively, they have a goals against average of 3.5 and a save percentage of 90.3. And so I guess it really doesn't matter who the Sabres put in at net. If the Wild are going to come away with a win here, this is a game that the Wild should win. They should win this one. This is much like an Arizona team in that, even if the Wild find themselves behind early, which does happen sometimes, they should be able to, just on talent alone, win this game. I mean, on offense, you're looking at guys such as Tage Thompson, who has 10 goals so far this year, Jeff Skinner, Rasmus Dahlin, Victor Olofsson, Kyle Okposo. You're looking at those guys going up against the likes of Kirill Kaprizov, Kevin Fiala, Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, Matt Zuccarello, Joel Eriksson-Ek. The list goes on and on and on. So for the Wild, this is a game that I think should be pretty easy, just win on talent alone. And with the fact that they've had a little bit of extra time with not having the game on Tuesday night, a little bit of extra time to get healthy, heal up, some nagging injuries. I would imagine Jonas Brodin will be back. He was set to play on Tuesday night against the Hurricanes. So I would imagine that he will play. And in net, I go right back to Cam Talbot because I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen on Saturday. So I think you go to Cam Talbot, let him start, and this should be a game that the Wilds can handle pretty emphatically and give themselves a chance to just get back out on the ice and win one in front of the home fans and then go from there. So I'm not expecting this to be really any sort of a challenge, to be honest, for the Wild. If it is, then we've got some bigger problems to discuss. But get the win on just sheer more talent than the Buffalo Sabres, and don't get anybody hurt. That's pretty much all you can ask for. So we'll see how things turn out, and hopefully the Wild will pick up win number 20 on the season, and we'll recap it for you, of course, tomorrow here on Locked On Wild. I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Good to get back on the airwaves, and glad to be back with you listeners. But we're going to keep it light here for today, and then we'll gradually get back to it fully here the rest of the week. So now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure to check out Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Locked On Bets is free and available on all podcast platforms. Just like Locked On Wild, you can follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow our social media channels as well: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We have unique content coming out on all of those platforms to keep you as up to date on Minnesota hockey as we possibly can. If a puck drops in the state of hockey, Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.